There you go. Good afternoon, members, and welcome to today's Insights Innovation Webinar, hosted by News Corp's Liza Williams, who is the Head of Growth Intelligence, Editorial and Product at the Growth Distillery. Thank you, Liza, and I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you, and thank you everyone for having me. It is great to be here and share some of the work that the Growth Distillery has been doing. So over the last few years, we have been working on understanding the forces that are shaping industries today. Our aim is to get under the hood of what consumers think, what they feel, to be able to advocate for consumers in all business decisions. That's everything from compelling people to vaccinate through to how youthfulness is manifesting. We really are working on the why behind the why behind the why. And so that is what I'm hoping to take you through today. But a quick note on what this isn't. This is not crystal balling. We are not in the business of predicting the future. We're not futurists. We primarily focus on the forces that connect us, more so than those that divide us. We are trying to help make sense of consumer behavior so that we can help brands and partners to find growth that's hiding in plain sight. So much like this graphic equalizer, if we simply recalibrate our focus, we can improve customers' ease in decision making. We can make brands more likely to be the product or service of choice and make customers happier that they chose those brands. It's all about the focus that you take. This is the trust me slide. We have spent the last 12 months or longer now, I think it's 18 months, working across 62 programs of work, 11 specialist organizations, 180 plus global experts, and more than 150,000 consumer conversations to bring us here to all of this depth of insight. So let's begin. The forces that are shaping us. The way that we interrogate decisions is being forced to adapt to a new decisioning context, and our decision making is increasingly under pressure. We have moved from a position of information scarcity to information overload. My favorite example of this is that everybody that is on this call and the majority of our consumers now have more information in the palm of their hands all the time than JFK had during the entire Cuban Missile Crisis. So this information overload is really causing a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety for consumers. We're also in a situation where we're now operating in a more codeless culture than we have done previously. Historically, we would have looked to social norms for help in making some of these decisions, and those are increasingly becoming harder to find as we become more niche and more scattered in terms of the communities and the groups that we are part of. We've also had an explosion of choice. In 1980, as an example, you would have gone into the average supermarket and there would have been 14,000 products on the shelves. Now there are over 30,000 products. Our brains, as a result, are having to increasingly rely on fast, instinctive thinking or system one thinking to make decisions. And they're skipping those deeper insights and deeper analysis that ordinarily would go along with some of these decisions. And this impacts every decision, from whether it's the shampoo that you want to get this week to the car that you buy. So we're living in a world where we now have more stimuli, more choice, more disruption, more loss aversion, more risk, more stress. And at the same time, we have less confidence, we have less time, less trust, safety, and comfort in those decisions that we're making. The next force that we've seen play out really strongly is around community, and community is the new king. Communities are those culture codes that we've noticed that are missing, and they really are hiding in plain sight now. This is why word of mouth is so prevalent. We have seen these have transcendent sway in smaller strong tie communities, where those stronger communities are really influencing their members' decisions. Gaming is a great place to look for this. Gaming companies have been amongst the very best at realizing the importance of nurturing their communities in not only an authentic way, but in an altruistic one too. They work with fans, they work with moderators, they work with users, and they really are working to build better experiences for their communities. And by doing that, they're establishing new lines of business. They're strengthening these positive communities through positive acts of service and being altruistic in that way. This space is offering us a fundamentally new model of a virtuous value creation and a new level of fandom, and we can see that in again another great example of the scale of this. There have now been more than 68 million years worth of time spent in Minecraft alone. And so that is huge. You know, you think about the time the communities are spending in these spaces. This is where they have real opportunity to have influence and sway over the decisions that consumers are making. And as a result, collaboration, co-creation, co-ownership are now at the center of everything. Gaming isn't just an industry, it is a force that is shaping the very fabric of our brain chemistry, the way that we interact with one another. And consumers are actively moving and shifting their preferences from passive content consumption to these more immersive experiences. And we're seeing that the money is following. It was only last year when we, KKR, Qantas Loyalty, Blackstone were bidding 25 times for TEG. And, you can really see that they see that this is where the money is going, and the money is going to come from in the future, and they're following it. And the 68 million years that I mentioned in Minecraft, that doesn't count the 1 trillion minutes that consumers have spent on Twitch watching people play Minecraft. So gaming really is setting the benchmark on this co-creation, this co-ownership and collaboration, and creating lifetime value. So with that as the context and the backdrop that we're operating in, what is driving us as consumers? And we're seeing really new mental models of well-being, wealth and scarcity, and they're reshaping what matters most. This has, we spent a lot of time trying to understand the mental models that consumers are using, and what a rich life looks like today is fundamentally changing. What consumers think of as essential has evolved and in four main ways. We are now much more focused on being well instead of well-being, and how consumers feel mentally and physically, what brings them joy, as opposed to just what their waist measurement is or what their blood pressure numbers are. We found in a piece of work that we did last year that happiness is now the biggest goal when we ask people about their health. And happiness is fundamentally not a quantifiable measure, but it's something that people are really focusing on when they think about their health. One of the other essentials that has really changed is escapism. And this was absolutely off the back of COVID and, COVID lockdowns and whatnot. But we really have been switching off on the couch, looking for those moments of escape, to traveling around the world. So they're getting away from the daily grind. Escapism from the monotony and the day-to-day is now really at the forefront of people's mind, and is something that they deem to be essential. And figuring out how they can weave that into their lives is really important to them. Shared connection is also another force that we're seeing play out really strongly. Long family lunches, nights out with friends, people after COVID really making sure that they are making the most of those connections and those people in their lives that they want to spend as much time with as possible. Shared connection is really driving a lot of the decisions that we're seeing from consumers. And then finally, micro moments, much, in a similar vein to the escapism that we talked to, but this is about finding those small moments of joy in the things that you have to do. It's joy to punctuate the everyday. And we know that, the pandemic has changed what we think matters most. And, priorities may change again but we, from 3 to 4 years ago, we're really seeing that these themes are continuing to feed through into a lot of the work that we're doing. And when you think about the strategy and campaigns that a lot of businesses and brands are continuing to evolve around, as these themes are changing and as consumers' mindsets are shifting, have we got the update to that strategy to make sure that we're making the most of it? Scarcity has evolved. Stuff isn't scarce anymore, but time is. And where we spend it and who we spend it with is really something that people are thinking a lot about, and experiences are making much more headway over product. One thing that we hear more than anything at the Growth Distillery is how do we grow with young people? But one of the things that we found is that young is not the same as youthful. And youthfulness is absolutely a mindset. It's not about what it says on your birth certificate. It's not about age. It is about maintaining curiosity and maintaining engagement. And youthfulness really is fueled by possibility and capability, and we know that we've got a lot of young people who just don't have the capability, capacity, funds, time to enjoy a lot of these more youthful pursuits. We assumed that looking at youthfulness, we would see a steady decline as people get older, but reality is that we were categorically wrong. We have absolutely stolen the youthfulness from our youth. Our Gen Z are much more deflated and pessimistic than previous generations. And this is important because focusing on youthful energy can help broaden the brand's appeal across a number of often overlooked segments. It may not be sexy, but youthfulness is in our older generations. It's what's your retiree growth strategy? They have the disposable income and the time, so the capability, and they also have the desire. They are searching for new things to do to spend their time. We really have seen through a number of pieces of work that we've got this bifurcation of in Australia, and these two Australias that are really at different ends of the spectrum. One has a huge amount of wealth, a huge amount of time, and really has the opportunity to go and search for these more youthful activities. And then there are those that are really struggling to survive and keep their head above water. So how are we bifurcating our brand strategies and the way that we engage with consumers to make sure that we're making the best opportunity to engage those different audiences, those different consumers. We have also found that Australia is quite, unique and has many unique cultural codes. It has an increasingly nuanced national identity, but there is also a huge amount that connects us. And so instead of trying to split us, there is much more upside in joining the dots together. The uniqueness of the Australian psyche means that what we do here or what we see overseas doesn't quite work on in our local environments. And we see this particularly with a lot of luxury products. What luxury means to Australians is fundamentally different to what it means to Italian consumers or Southeast Asian consumers. And for what that means for brands and how they show up in the local environment is really important. We need to make sure that we are adapting and localizing for those unique sets of culture codes that we see operating in Australia that are not necessarily the same as you would see in other countries. So, how can brands connect us? We have delved into trust a fair bit in a lot of the work that we're doing, and what we have found is that it is now not about building trust, it is about actively breaking cynicism. We are in an era of anti-institutional and anti-intellectualism, and it's absolutely becoming prominent. There is a deep level of distrust in big enterprise and corporations. And according to the World Economic Forum, misinformation is our #1 threat. For a lot of brands, this means that we need to convince them that we are not who they think we are. And it really gives us an opportunity to rethink how we do this. We are absolutely seeing this play out with our younger consumers. Gen Z particularly have very high levels of cynicism and distrust. But there are a number of brands who are doing a really good job in this space, and Uber have done this brilliantly. There was a fair bit of anti-corporate sentiment when it came to Uber. So with one of their campaigns, they went super micro. They went to the drivers and the local communities that they were operating in, and this fundamentally changed the perspective in them. People are looking for markers of trust, and people trust people. And so being able to put a face to the brand or to the people that you serve and to the people who are serving those communities has really added a huge amount of value. And we've studied a fair bit on behavioral economics, and we have found that even trusted payment sources, being able to demonstrate to consumers that there is, you can either use Visa or MasterCard or Amex, or those trusted payment sources is actually a very effective nudge to give consumers at the top of the funnel. So being aware of the markers of trust that people are looking for in some of their decisions or some of their their consumption funnels is really important, and being able to put that front and center will really add additional value. And you would think that that having a trusted payment source is a given, but in the modern day where we're seeing a lot of scam activity, we're seeing a lot of people really uncertain about how they should interact with their brands. Being able to give people those little markers, those little signals, will really help to get them across the line. Because people trust people, and people like me or people that you aspire to be like is the biggest influence for consumers now. And in an ever scarier world, building agency is absolutely our most valuable asset. The world, I think, for many people is feeling increasingly out of control. Consumers are craving a sense of agency and control over their decisions and their lives. We are seeing increasingly that we are being trained towards fear from a very young age. And as a result, psychological safety now drives 60%, 60 to 40 of our decision making when compared to the investment that you're making in that decision. So when you think about how you can make people and how you can make consumers feel confident and feel safe in the environment that they're making those decisions, is going to add a tremendous amount of value and a tremendous amount of trust to the interaction that we're having with you. Our filtered selves, or the version of ourselves that we feel most safe presenting to the world, is actually much more anxious, much less likely to choose, and much more likely to make a poorer choice because of all of the information overload and the number of decisions that are having to be made. One of the critical levers for post-purchase experience and consumer stickiness is to convince them that they have made the right choice, and giving consumers that confidence post-decision is really going to give them that sense of agency and will be incredibly valuable. So given all of this, we really do have to rethink influence. In a world where the rules have been rewritten, we have the opportunity to leverage a new magic trick, as we're calling it, and that is where affinity comes in. Affinity really does reign supreme, and there has been a foundational shift away from traditional authority and logical information to affinity and the people that we aspire to be like. But there is a Goldilocks zone. And one of my favorite examples of this are the Kardashians. And if you think, back to, what was it, 10, 15 years ago when they first started and they first had their show, they were just a group of sisters dealing with, relatively, relatable challenges, who's borrowed my mini skirt, those kind of things where we can all go, oh yeah, we've all been in those kinds of situations. They were very relatable, they felt very proximate, and so we had great affinity with them. Now, with their stratospheric wealth, they're a little bit out of reach, and we are now engaging with them more as a in a goldfish bowl, and we're watching them as a spectacle rather than as something that is truly going to influence our lives. And this is what we call the Goldilocks zone, that space where consumers are engaged, it feels proximate, but it also feels aspirational but achievable. And finding that absolutely, that Goldilocks zone for brands and for the communication that we have with our consumers is going to deliver engagement with consumers that is in reach. However, influence codes, which is where a lot of this work comes from, has also shown us that we don't need to be rigid with the way in that we communicate with our consumers in this space, and we can be flexible. We have a number of influence archetypes that have come out through this piece of work, and we can absolutely use different archetypes and different tones to speak to consumers in different situations. We don't need to be rigid to the brand guidelines or the brand tone that has previously been set in order to influence decision making, and we can flex it depending on the proximity and the moment that we're trying to influence. And the communities that I talked about earlier on, those serve as pre-existing centers of affinity. People are in those communities because they feel proximate and they feel affinity for the other people in those communities. So an opportunity for brands is really to think about how we can engage in those communities and tap into them, but also contribute in a very altruistic and authentic way to make sure that we're building that trust and that engagement in those environments. Differentiation and distinction now lie well beyond the product. And how does a product stand out? How does a brand stand out from the crowd? We found that functionality has absolutely leapfrogged utility, coupled with explosion of choice and a codeless culture. Product alone is rarely a differentiator for brands. It is much more now about what sits around this. And we have found this very much so in retail, in auto, in food. It's the experience. People are looking for that experiential elements to those purchases. It's about the loyalty programs, it's about the UX, it's about the after service. And to stand out, brands really must go beyond just the features, and invest in creating a holistic value experience that will build long-term customer relationships and nurture that loyalty as they go through the process, as they go through the purchase and their lifetime with the brand. However, simplicity is now actually the greatest competitive advantage that you have. I talked previously to this paradox of choice, this information overwhelm, and the paradox of choice really does lead to filter failure. Consumers are struggling to make decisions when they're overwhelmed with options, and they're often deferring or regretting their choices afterwards because it becomes too difficult. So simplicity really can be the best offense. The iPhone is a great example of this, and its success really does lie in its simplicity. You either have the small one or you have the big one, and it's one product that fulfills a number of key needs, and it's making customers happier with their choice because they're just picking one or the other. Simplifying offerings reduces decision fatigue, and it enhances satisfaction. It also reduces that hypothetical trade-off, oh, I wonder if that shampoo would have made my hair feel softer or more smooth. It's really about making consumers confident that the decision that they've made is the right one, so that they can move on. And sometimes that opportunity of choice is the biggest weakness. So what about tech? It would be remiss of me not to talk about the digital landscape and how this is impacting our consumers. So as our consumers are shifting further digitally, we actually risk knowing less about them, not more. I mentioned our filtered selves, the one we feel safe sharing into the world. These are much more like digital avatars, and in reality are like peering through a keyhole. We shouldn't, as brands, be listening to the filtered self of our consumer. We see these projected selves, they're not authentic, they're not really adhering to the value drivers that we need for our consumers. So how much of your brands, or brands that you work with, how much of their digital decisions are being made based on those digital fingerprints? Getting closer to the real customer is going to become much more important than ever before. And Gen AI. It wouldn't be a forces shaping presentation without talking about Gen AI. It really is reshaping consumer behavior much faster than it is industry. And as with any disruptive tech, consumers are going to be much more creative and flexible with it than we give them credit for. We are often obsessed with what it means for our industry and what it means for our business, but the reality is that it's going to disrupt consumer behavior before we even have chance to adapt. A great example with travel and conversational commerce. What happens when we can book a travel itinerary straight with Gen AI? And think about how consumers are finding your products and services, and as opposed to how to get your products and service to them more efficiently. This will make it easier for great products and services to win, because it is very much about, do they meet the needs? There is a very specific algorithm that will get them in front of consumers. So it would be much less about those that have the best SEO or the most money to spend. It will be more about what is the product that meets the need, and that is the easiest available to consumers at that time. And the Internet of Things and tech ecosystems are also going to have a lot more sway over our consumption than we think. the pandemic had caused 10 years of tech literacy to be collapsed into 3 years, and we now all know how to use video conferencing. When 5 years ago we were like, what is that? And as a result, we're seeing now that 1 in 5 queries on the internet is done through voice, and the sale of AirPods is a great example of this. I believe AirPods alone revenue for AirPods alone is now bigger than Spotify or Nintendo or eBay revenues for one product in the Apple ecosystem. And demographics will shift to technographics and your technographic posture, particularly when it comes to the purchase journey. We've done a great piece of work understanding what those technographic postures are. But when we have designed journeys to consumers' technographic postures, we found that 40% greater capture at the top of the funnel. We found that basket abandonment halved. We found that the next purchase likelihood increased by 1/3, and that was all by adapting the journeys and building journeys for the way that consumers want to use their technology. But we do need to be aware of the cognitive frictions. There's reducing the ease. We need to, they can reduce the ease, cognitive frictions that is, but we need them there to increase trust. Nobody wants to buy a house or a car in one click, and so we need to be able to build and cater to the diversity of our consumers and their technographic postures, and that's how we'll reap the rewards through the purchase funnel. But I do want to end on a positive note before opening it up to questions. All of this does mean that it is all up for grabs. There is a huge amount that has been changing, and for brands that are willing to be brave, there has never been a better time to speak to new consumers and to reintroduce yourselves because of what's playing out. The gains that we make when the economy is struggling will compound over time when the economy upticks. And so for now, it's all up for grabs. We do know less about our consumers now, but there is growth hiding in plain sight. And there's never been a better time to reintroduce yourselves to current consumers, to new consumers, to potential consumers. And that's it from me. It's been great sharing this work for you. Thanks so much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. That little QR code, I believe, is for some feedback. Is that right, Beck?
That is, members. If you could please just take literally 20 seconds, scan the QR code. There's just 2 quick questions just to vote on today's webinar. So we've got some feedback on the content. That'd be greatly appreciated. Remember that everyone that does submit will go into the draw to win at the end of the quarter a voucher. And then any questions, which sometimes we don't get because we understand that people prefer to contact directly. So we can pass on the details for the News Corp team.
Absolutely. And if you go to a lot of the work that I shared there is available on the Growth Distillery website. So you can download a number of the pieces of research there to have a read.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, members. Thank you so much, Lisa, for today's webinar. It was really informative and interesting. And members, have a great week.
Thank you, guys. Bye.